Can Devon Larratt actually defeat Levan Saginashvilli? This is the main question that we're going to be asking in 2024 as we approach what will be undoubtedly the most interesting and biggest match of the year. Devon and Levan, this will be part 2 in their rivalry. Of course, Levan having a resounding victory where he actually broke Devon at King of the Table last year. But more importantly than that is the fact that Devon has had time. Devon has clearly evolved since their last battle, and now he may possess, or may not possess, the tools required to defeat the Georgian Hulk. So what this video is going to do is we're going to dive into the specifics of Devon Larratt's strength development since their last match, and we're going to have a look at what that means. Does that translate to victory against Levan Saginashvilli, or is the Georgian Hulk still too strong?
Look to counter, will he try to flame it up? Massive drive! Enormous hit! And the first pin goes to Levan Saginashvilli!
Wow!
Now, if we remember back to King of the Table when they first faced each other, it was Devon Larratt in round 1 who seemingly got some degree of stop. There was that King's move attempt where he got pulled open and across the table clearly by the dominant Levan Saginashvilli, but there was a little moment down at the bottom of the table. Look, some referees could call it a pin. The one on the day did. Some referees, probably the minority, but some of them would have called it play on. So there was a little stop down there in that open arm King's move defense. What that tells us is that Devon's hand was adequate to get access to that King's move. Now, what it takes to be strong enough to have access to a King's move means your ability to have secure fingers, to have strong ulnar deviation, to have strong pronation through your thumb, and to have strong rear delts to be able to drag your opponent and separate them from their tight back pressure, all needs to be intact. If you don't have sufficient strength there, the King's move simply will not work. Now, on this day, Levan did get the victory. We know that. But there was that glimmer of hope. And from that starting point, we're going to analyze what Devon's strengths now are. And will that mean the stop happens higher, or will he break again? Now, of course, we can't forget how significantly strong Levan Saginashvilli is. He is just the king of the hill when it comes to back pressure. When it comes to wrist flexion, those two things really are his dominant force. It doesn't take much to work out that his physicality is as good as it gets. He is a giant man. He peaks up around 180 kilograms, and his wrist measurements are simply off the charts, bigger than anybody else's. His fundamental power has no doubt continued to grow since their last match. And so that is a factor as well. We can't just simply say that Devon's progressed and Levan hasn't. We can speculate on their activity levels, which Devon has had significantly more. But Levan, I mean, it's Levan. He's a Georgian arm wrestler. He's surrounded by people that live and breathe arm wrestling. To think that he hasn't progressed would be a big, big mistake. So Levan's back. Levan's ready. Levan's, coming off a little bit of an injury, but he is returning with intent. And he is always going to be progressing. So just keep that in your mind as well, that Levan has progressed. Now, since this day, we've seen Devon Larratt really take on a static pronated back pressure and rise emphasis in his training. His numbers have progressed over the last 12 months from early 60 kilos to now 70 kilos on this lift. Now, of course, this lift does translate to and is considered one of the most fundamental parts of arm wrestling strengths. Back pressure and pronation really will attack your opponent's wrist flexion. Now, taking away the wrist flexion of Levan Saginashvilli is a crucial thing. Levan secures his access to his own finishing force or his own side pressure via his wrist flexion first and foremost. He's a man that uses his bicep and uses both finger flexion and wrist flexion to really lock down that ability to go sideways. Once there, he's good. So Devon Larratt will benefit from that. Taking his lift from 60 to 70 kilos in a 12-month period, no doubt has had a big effect. And that effect is best demonstratable against Ermes Gasparini. Ermes Gasparini went into the match against Levan against Devon, as the overwhelming favourite in the majority of polls. But what actually happened on the day was nothing short of amazing. Devon Larratt literally took Hermes away with ease. It was his static rise, his static pronation, that really just utterly denied Hermes Gasparini the opportunity to access his top role. Now, Levan Saginashvilli is not Hermes Gasparini. They are a different arm wrestlers. And even though Hermes did incredibly well against Levan Saginashvilli, it is the dynamic of the wrist size and the hand size that changes things in respect to how any two given arm wrestlers add up. Okay, so let's talk about setups of both Levan and Devon, what they're looking for, what they're struggling to get, what will cause them to panic, and how that will translate to access to power after the go. So often we see matches, particularly with Devon, where the setup is almost where he wins the entire match. Often after the go, it's just a formality and they're just running through things. But with Devon, winning that setup becomes such a crucial thing. Now, if I think about Levan's setup, he is a very fundamentally sort of square to the table. He likes to have his wrist up, but he'll drop it slightly if he needs to. But he is a bicep driven, wrist flexion driven kind of guy. Now, Levan is not a short human. I think he's about 6'3", maybe 6'2.5". Devon is 6'4", 6'5", something. I'm not sure exactly, but it's definitely taller than Levan. So when Levan is sitting there posting and rising and clamping with his fingers, ultimately what he wants is for his opponent to just settle. He would love his opponent to just agree to a grip that allows Levan to keep his elbow on the table, to be in the good books of the referee, but whilst also maintaining enough coverage through the fingers. Now, finger flexion alone, keep in mind that finger flexion alone is not sufficient to contain someone's back pressure of Devon Larratt's caliber. Finger flexion alone will fail. Arm wrestling is often about combining as many strengths as possible against as few strengths as possible in your opponent. So one of the things that protects Levan Saginashvilli and is so crucial to victory for him is wrist rise. Every time the man with a longer lever, Devon, rises up, if Levan stays low, he loses access to his own pronation. If Levan stays low, he gives Devon Larratt too much opportunity to attack. The one tool, and the most crucial tool that Levan can use to keep Devon from doing that, is wrist rise. Wrist rise is one method that he can use legally. The other method is to lift his arm off the table and try to reach past and grab more purchase on his finger flexion and wrist flexion. But of course, remembering that you can't start with your wrist bent in an arm wrestle, it's got to be straight. So finger flexion is super crucial for Levan. Now, in this position, Levan just wants fundamental back pressure engaged, fingers locked, wrist straight, and then off the go, he is going to attempt to win that high ground. He's going to win that high ground with wrist up, with bicep, and he's hoping Devon Larratt's wrist, which will be in a lower hand position, I assure you it will be, he's hoping to see that happen, that crack of the wrist where he gets twisted and turned away. So that vulnerability will come from Devon if all goes well for Levan. Now let's have a look at the other side of the coin and see what Devon's setup might be like. Okay, so if we're talking about Devon Larratt's setup, we're talking about a slightly different situation compared to Levan. Devon is the man that has the longer forearm. He's the taller man. He's probably got a longer hand as well when we're talking about from the base of the hand to the top of the fingers. Now, this we've seen time and time again. It's been the main tool that he's used to take away victories from people like Hermes Gasparini, Georgi Svetkov, and the list goes on. Devon will drop his hand. Devon will use a rising pressure from the base of his wrist. Now, this rising pressure is what causes so much stress in his opponents. It's what makes his opponents want to lift up their elbow. And the reason that rising pressure causes so much anxiety and stress in his opponent is because it's accompanied by static pronation. Now, even though Devon Larratt isn't actively lifting his opponents, there's something that can only be described, it almost can only be felt and experienced as an arm wrestler. Even though the webbing height will be level in the eyes of the referee, there is always one person that has a demonstrable dominance, let's call it. When you're an arm wrestler, you can feel that you either have that dominance or you don't have that dominance. And that dominance is present in Devon Larratt's setups. That rising, pronated from a long arm position creates that sense of panic in the opponents. As I mentioned before, Levan can counter it with wrist rise, but of course, Devon with the longer arm can also counter not only with just raw wrist rise, but he can accompany that wrist rise with rising pressure where he pivots onto the back of his elbow rather than the front of his elbow and lifts into that pressure. He is able to get to that same degree of height as Levan can reach without having to rise his wrist all the way up. Now, this typically creates a problem for shorter arm pullers. It typically creates a great opportunity for the longer arm puller to get what they want. Now, from there, we see Devon often go on to a very well calculated conversation with the referees. This conversation with the referees is crucial. If you're seen as the bad guy in the eyes of the referee, you will less likely get what you want in the setup. Devon Larratt has been refining that conversation over the years, and he's getting very good at it. He's getting very good at highlighting his opponent's desires to pick up their elbow and secure a bit more finger flexion. He's highlighting it perfectly in such a way that he is getting what he wants. Now, let's just pause for a second and just remind everyone that I'm not saying that anyone cheats. I'm saying the match has already started. I'm saying when you are called to the table, the match is on, the setups are part of the game, and getting a dominant setup is part of being superior to your opponent. So let's just keep that in mind. Devon Larratt's setup will be a dropped wrist. It will be a high pivoting static pressure. From there, Devon Larratt is going to be in a state where he is constantly assessing the integrity of Levan's wrist flexion. I expect Devon to be leaning forward. I expect Levan to be leaning back. As when I say leaning forward, it's not going to be coming forward. It's not going to be hooking pressure, but it's going to be in a position where after the go, he has some room to rise even further. And he will be taking those millimeters. He'll be putting that static pressure on just before the go, waiting for that referee's grip. And on the referee's grip, there will be a rise by pivoting onto the back of the elbow and an attempt at statically pronating. Now, if the wrist of Levan cracks, happy days, he'll go through it. Round one, it's unlikely to happen. It's more likely to stay really stuck and locked. Now, from here, this tight position here where he'll bring his shoulder forward and drag as hard as he can now at the breakdown point. And what I mean by the breakdown point is the failure point of that effort. If he drags like this and it hits the effort, Levan will start to move sideways. That's when you will see Devon return to that King's move. Now, as we said, he went to that King's move 2023, got a little bit of a stop. He's stronger now. Is the stop there? Maybe. But anyway, setups are going to be crucial. Okay, so one of the other big factors outside of setups and outside of peak strength and sufficient amounts of force is aerobic capacity. Now, Levan Saginashvilli against Hermes Gasparini did reveal a chink in his armor. By round number 5, he was withdrawing from the match. He was up 4-0, but he'd redlined to that point, and aerobically he was struggling. He had an oxygen mask called for him and was in no shape to continue. Now, he still won that match, and some people will say that was still a 4-0 victory. Some people will call it a 4-2 victory. Either way, it did demonstrate that Levan Saginashvilli does not have the aerobic capacity to go down to the wire in a big match. Now, Devon Larratt, contrasting on that, is someone who has come from a Special Forces background. The aerobic capacity, it may not be present in him like it once was, but I'm certain it's there more than it is with Levan. Devon has three young children who he runs to school with each morning. And that was what he did when I visited him last. But those sorts of things are part and parcel their everyday activities with someone like Devon. No doubt Devon's capacity is better than Levan's. Now, will that play a role in the match? Of course, it will only be a factor if the match is actually coming down to the wire. Now, if it comes down to the wire, we have to all say that Devon is going to be coming home in that respect. Efficiency is on the side of Devon Larratt. Aerobic capacity on the side of Devon Larratt, but peak force is on the side of Levan Saginashvilli. The magical thing is we don't know how this goes. It all bubbles down and plays out before our eyes at what will be East vs West. This will be a very special match without any doubt. Devon Larratt and Levan Saginashvilli, the most important match of 2024. The details of this match will continue to flow, and we will talk about them more and more as we see things evolve between these two. But as it stands right now, we have a very, very fascinating match on our hands. A man that has been so dominant in Levan Saginashvilli. He wants to assert it once again. Devon wants to come back and show that there's more to his game, that he can find the way. After being broken by Levan last year, he can find a way back, and he can find a way to actually achieve the impossible. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about these technical details that we're expecting to see in this match. I think it's going to be an amazing one, and I wouldn't miss it.